Here's one of the questions about composition of functions, similar to the one we did in class, but let's do it on a video so you have a chance to process. We're asked about the composite function f of g, and so remember that this funky notation, f of g represents a new function, but f of g applied to an input is just doing f of g of x. In other words, first doing the g rule to x, and then taking that answer and doing the f rule to that. So in this case, g of x is given to be 2x plus 7, and so we can come up with this algebra formula by evaluating g of x as 2x plus 7, and now this says to take the rule for f and put 2x plus 7 into it as input, which means we have to take this function and change the x into 2x plus 7. So that means that under the square root sign, instead of an x, we will now have a 2x plus 7. So this is the rule for f of g of x. Now the question here is just about the domain, and so what we can think about is what's happening to an input at every stage in this process. So when we first put an x into this function, this is happening. The g of x is being replaced by 2x plus 7, and there's no domain issues at all for that. In other words, there's nothing that you could put in for x, no number you could put in for x that would give an error when you try to evaluate 2x plus 7. So the domain at that point is everything, minus infinity to infinity. But now that you're putting 2x plus 7 into f, now that you have this 2x plus 7 that you're putting into f, you have to deal with the fact that f only allows numbers that are not negative, right? The inputs into f have to be non-negative numbers. Well, this is now the input into f. And so for that next step to happen, we need the input for f, which is 2x plus 7, to not be negative, which means we need it to be greater than or equal to 0. So even though this step is fine 100% of the time, the second step is only fine if the input to f is greater than or equal to 0. And so to find the domain of this function, we have to consider both of those things. Fortunately, the first step means we don't have to think about it. But the second step, being the inequality 2x plus 7 greater than or equal to 0, we can write, that is a description, but we could write it in a way that's easier to input as interval, or in this case a set notation, by solving this for x. So to solve for x, I'm just going to isolate the x on one side of the inequality by first subtracting 7 from both sides, and then multiplying both sides by a half, or dividing both sides by 2, whichever way you want to think about it, and I'll have x greater than or equal to negative 7 halves. And so that's, since they want this in terms of an inequality instead of an interval, that's exactly what we could put here, and that will describe the domain. If it had asked for an interval, this one doesn't, but if I did want to write this as an interval, the set of all x's greater than or equal to negative 7 halves would be written as the interval negative 7 halves to infinity, making sure that I'm using the square brace here to indicate that negative 7 halves is included, because when x is negative 7 halves, the 2x plus 7 here is equal to 0, and the square root of 0 is fine. The square root of 0 is 0. Again, the square root only has a problem if the numbers that you put in are negative. So either way, in this problem, since it asks for a set notation with an inequality, we would use this, but in other problems it will ask for an interval, we would put that.